My name's James and I paint minis. This is Spoon 37 Minis.
Previously you saw me paint this Hive Tyrant torso and legs with deep blue from the army painter. Now we're going to continue with all of the parts like the tail, head and arms. Anywhere that has carapace needs to paint this colour, deep blue from the army painter. As before, going in exactly the same order, which means after the body we paint the tail, which has a series of very small overlapping plates, and the principle is exactly the same as the spine that runs down the torso, only having painted this separately it's much more exposed and much easier to paint, so I paint essentially a thick line on each plate. So the idea is to paint roughly half of each little plate. It can be slightly less than half, that's okay. And I'll paint this side, then the next side, and then I'll go over the top just to make sure it's actually covered all the way around. Now, just as before, the trick with these is to get the paint right up to the edge of the plate, but not really go over that edge, because otherwise you end up going over the dark recess, and it does need to be dark there in order to have contrast. So you want to go right up to the edge of the plate and no more. I'm starting to realise I might not have mounted this in the best way to get at these little plates underneath, but I think I can make it work with this arrangement. As you can see, once I've got my fingers out of the way and I'm holding onto the end just to keep it steady, it's not that hard to paint these little plates. They are just getting smaller as they go along, and of course because I've mounted it on a piece of wire it tends to wobble about, so I do have to steady it a little bit. Right, that's one side done. Moving on to the other side, same principle applies, painting right up to the edge, but only trying to paint roughly half of each plate. You may notice if you watched the previous video, I talked about on the leg plates doing kind of striations or parallel lines going down. These plates are a bit small to do that with, to be honest with you. I'll do that later with a very fine brush and some of the lighter colours, but for this stage it's really just enough that it has paint on it, and I'll refine this with a second coat later on. You may notice as I paint this sometimes I'll go sort of across the plate and then sort of along the bottom as well. It really depends how each individual plate is sculpted. Some of them have a distinct edge that goes that way, so I'm just trying to follow that with the paint. Some of them it's actually much more plain and I don't feel it's worth bothering, so if that seems inconsistent it's simply to match what's actually sculpted here rather than trying to force each plate to have a little L-shaped pattern, if you see what I mean. Some of the plates are actually sculpted like that and some of them are not. Having fun with the mounting system again. As you can see it does wobble about a bit, but it should be held securely enough that I can do these last few very small plates, and they do get smaller towards the tip of the tail. Right, so now just for completeness, we go over the top just to make sure that the two sides of the plates actually line up, and if they're uneven we try and correct that at the same time. Otherwise it's just a case of one brushstroke per plate if it's going well, and if it's not going too well then we have to do a little bit more work. So far it's going well. Despite the block of wood, I am actually still trying to show this to the camera, so you can just see me going over the tops of each bit, which does take some twisting and turning, but you get there in the end. Now you may have thought that was it for the tail, but it does have these overlapping plates on the tail tip rather resembling a complete scorpion, with the tail being its tail, if you see what I mean. But it's got these overlapping plates, and we need to get those painted as well, otherwise the tail tip is going to look very out of place. So it's painted in the same way. It's actually a reverse pattern though, so the blue faces towards the body of the Hive Tyrant rather than away from it, whereas the tail plates all face away. So it's like a reverse colour thing, but that'll hardly be noticeable on the final model, or finally assembled model I should say. You just need to get the blue on half of the plates, and then having done the top, you need to do the two little plates on the underside. Again, this is an exercise in finding whatever angle you can get the brush in at. I might not have mounted this in the best way for this particular area. Maybe the tail should have been mounted upside down for this. But of course it was easy to paint the initial plates this way, so it's a kind of compromise. Right, that's the tail completely done for this stage, so now we're moving on to the head. Again, same pattern as before, but here, unlike painting the black in an earlier video, I only need to worry about the plates that are right on top of the head, and I've actually got the brush to a very fine tip because, as you can see, the ones at the very front of the head are particularly tiny, so I've just got to be careful that I don't overlap into the red. In fact, my technique is actually to paint, try and stay within the black, and then if I look at it later and think, that needs to go closer to the edge, I'll then come back and do a bit more. So you will see me go back and forth on this one a few times. It's just to make sure that I've got it right up to the edges, but not actually over the red. Now again, rather like with the tail, if you've done both sides, it's a good idea to go over the center as well, and particularly with these, there is actually a ridge in the center that you really want to make sure is painted. Moving swiftly on to this sword arm, I won't be painting the whip arm at all because it doesn't actually have any carapace, although I did paint parts of it black last time. It's all kind of weapon and claws and so on. There's no actual carapace to paint, so I don't need to do this blue paint stage at all. There is a bit of artistic license on this one though, because it's such a big shoulder pad. The bit directly over the arm, you kind of want it to look like it has a sort of hollowed out area for the arm to go in. So you don't paint the blue right down to the arm, you just paint a lip over the edge. And then the rest is just how far along the plate you want to go, because of course against the body it should be black, against the edge of the plate it should be blue, and that's it. Same again with the gun arm, although again most of this is going to be shades of grey rather than blue, so it's only really the shoulder pad. I'm sorry that this particular footage is a little bit blurry. I've actually moved it away from the camera for ease of painting. But the principle is exactly the same as the previous arm. You just got to go up to the edge and then slightly over that edge to make it look like it's just a leading edge of the carapace rather than going all the way down to the arm. Alright, so that pretty much finishes us off. I'm not going to have still pictures of all of it, but this is kind of what I'm aiming for.
Right, if you watched this far, first of all, thank you for watching. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. If you liked it, please hit like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell-shaped icon so you can get notifications about future videos. I hope they will be coming out soon.